Hey Bio 112 students, this is chapter 1, our first lecture. So if you want, you can have this PowerPoint printed out and going through it. You can print out just the Word version of the chapter notes, or you can just be taking notes on your own. The first chapter is just an introductory chapter. We're going to just briefly touch on important topics that we'll see throughout the semester. Okay, why do we need to study biology? We are constantly hit in our daily lives with scientific information. You go on your Facebook page and there's at least 4 or 5 articles that people have posted or advertisements have used that use science, that use biology. So it's very important that as a society we understand what science is, how it works, so that we can evaluate good resources from bad. That's very important. Okay, so what is biology? Bio is life, ology is study of. So biology is the study of life. And life, that goes from small scale to globally. So we will start out in this class looking at small. We'll look at chemistry. And then we'll get bigger and bigger picture. We'll go to like ecology, how communities work together. And then the earth as a whole. And we'll look at biodiversity and how important that is to life. The more biodiversity we have, the healthier our environment is, the more resources we have. Okay. So when you talk about life, there are 7 characteristics that we say every living thing has to have in order to exist and be considered alive. First, they exhibit order. So what that means is they are at least made of cells. That's the cell theory. They've got different parts. Okay, and then going on with the cell theory, all living things are made up of cells. So theory is the strongest word that you can use in science. We'll look at this a little bit more later. Every single part of life that we found have cells. So we've made the theory that everything is made of cells. Have we looked at every single living thing? Nope, everything we've looked at has cells. It's all supported this theory. If we found something made of not cells, we would have to adjust the theory. Okay, next, maintenance of a steady state, homeostasis or regulation. We are constantly monitoring our body's levels of pH, temperature, to help keep them within a normal range. That's called homeostasis. We've got all these ways to balance. If our temperature gets too high, we start sweating. If our temperature gets too low, we start shivering. And then growth and development. So over time, things change. They grow, they get bigger. Our DNA helps control what we're producing. More characteristics of life, energy utilization. You've got a metabolism. There are chemical reactions occurring. We eat food, use it to run a marathon. Next, we interact with one another in the environment. So organisms have to be able to respond to their environment. If they don't, they aren't able to survive. Also, they reproduce. They either asexually or sexually reproduce, make offspring. And then species evolve. All that means is that over time you'll see different traits being selected for. Some will be more advantageous than others. Those individuals with the certain traits will pass on more genetics to their children, their offspring, and that trait will increase in the population. That's what evolution means. An individual can't do that. Next, let's look at ecosystems. So ecosystems, that's the organisms and their environment and the interactions between them. So you've got like abiotic and biotic factors. Biotic factors are the living pieces, and abiotic, non-living. So like the nutrients, the amount of water, the temperature, for example. The biotic factors are who's making the nutrients, consumers, decomposers. Okay, and then both organisms and the environment are interactive. We'll see different nutrient cycling and energy moving through. Ecology is the branch of biology that looks at this. I would consider myself an ecologist. I look at the relationships between like elephants and their different like nutrient areas and then their predators. Okay, so let's look at the two processes that are important for an ecosystem. Cycling of nutrients and the flow of energy through. Okay. So energy flows through the ecosystem. Each level we go through, you're going to lose some of the energy as heat. So there's going to be less and less available. That's why each level of the food web, food chain you go up, you're going to see less and less of each type of animal. So like you've got lots of plants, and then your primary consumers like herbivores like rabbits, deer, you'll have lots of those, but less than the amount of plants. And then next level up, you'll have like predators, snakes, coyotes, wolves. You'll have even less of those because that ecosystem only supports so many animals based on the number of plants. Okay, so whereas energy flows through, constantly comes in as light, plants, photosynthetic organisms make more energy, they make sugars. Consumers eat those sugars and use them, and we've got energy lost as heat. Whereas nutrients cycle. So right here we'll have, the carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle. There will be carbon sugars made in this plant that will be eaten by the deer, that will become part of its organic structure. And then it will die. It'll decompose. Those nutrients will get broken down. The plant will take them up through its roots. So it's this cycle rather than flowing through. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the cell theory already, but the cell is the lowest level of structure that can perform all the activities required for life. So we've got different types of cells. You've got animal cells. This is the biggest, a prokaryotic cell, like a bacteria, and then a plant cell, a more rigid wall. All living organisms that we found are made of cells. And inside that cell, you've got DNA, this genetic material that codes for new animals, new bacteria, new plants. It tells them what proteins they need to make and determines the function of those cells. The last part of the cell theory is that all cells arise from previously existing cells. So to get a new cell for an animal cell, it divides. You make two sets of DNA, you get two new copies. There are generally two types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Prokaryotic is before nucleus, eukaryotic has a true nucleus. So like prokaryotes, they'll often have their DNA, they're just sitting there in their cytoplasm, in the cell fluid and organelles there. Whereas eukaryotic cells, they have a nucleus, they have this specified structure that holds the DNA. So we are eukaryotics. All animals, eukaryotes. Bacteria, for example, would be an example of a prokaryotic cell. Eukaryote. You've got those cells. That's how I like to remember. Okay, so here this shows a nice example of the prokaryotic cell with the DNA just floating around inside the cell. Whereas in the background, much larger, you've got the eukaryotic cell. It's got these things called organelles that are the little pieces of metabolic machinery. So they're like the construction line. They've got different functions. The largest organelle in eukaryotes is going to be the nucleus. It's going to stain the darkest. If you look at microscope slides, it'll be very easy to see the nucleus. So how do we pass on our DNA? How do we know what proteins to make? The code is DNA. This 4-letter system codes for different proteins. We'll look more at that in different chapters. But DNA, just 4 letters, A, C, T, G. Adenine, cytosine, thymine, guanine. And those match up together, so we have this double-stranded DNA. So A matches with T, and C matches with G. So you would have this second strand over here with T, G, A, T matching up. So then when we wanted to read our DNA and make proteins, we'd have to pull those two parts apart and have an enzyme come in and make new DNA or make RNA to make proteins. And all the genes in one individual, one organism, is called the genome. So there's this thing called the Human Genome Project where we wanted to look at all the genetics of a human and have them all down. And it happened. They had different labs working together that found our genome. Now let's look at life and the diversity of life. So biologists are constantly classifying the life diversity, grouping things together, looking at how they fit together. There's at least 1.8 million species of life that is known. And for all that we know, estimates range that there's even more species. We've got different types. We've got decomposers who break down nutrients. We've got photosynthesizers, like plants that make energy. We've got herbivores that eat the plants and carnivores that eat the herbivores. Biodiversity, that's all the diversity, all the different types of life. And we classify those looking at different species. And it can be very overwhelming. Like, those are all different species of butterfly. We collect samples. Taxonomy is the branch that names and classifies species. So Homo sapiens as humans, that's our taxonomic category. It shows how things are related together, how recently they were connected, and orders them. It gives them names. Within taxonomy, we separate out things into different categories. We start out with very broad categorizations, and then we get more specific until we get to the individual species. The most broad classification is the domain. We have 3: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Based on what you know about cell types, you should think that the domain eukarya is eukaryotes. Bacteria and archaea are prokaryotic. They're more simple cells. Eukaryotes, we've got protists, plants, fungi, and animals. So we said prokaryotic, bacteria, and archaea. They used to be combined together, these two groups of single-celled microorganisms. But as they looked at archaea more closely, they have metabolism that's more similar to us, to eukaryotes. Okay, so domain is the most broad term we can use for an organism, whether it's eukarya, archaea, for example. Next is kingdoms. So they're a little bit more specific. So to remember the taxonomic categories, what we say is we say, King Philip came over 4 good sandwiches. King Philip came over 4 good sandwiches. K stands for kingdom, King Philip. P stands for phylum. C, class. O, order. For family. F for family. Genus and species, good sandwiches. You'll see different words for that, like great spaghetti, for example. But that relates to the different levels of organization. Here's a little infographic showing Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. King Philip came over for good sandwiches. So we'll get more into